Hi. Um, this is going to be probably the first one, whether you're coming to me now or fingers crossed several years from now, and there's content just out there in the world. Um, the people who love and care about me have supported me for years and have been sort of on my case to start podcasting. So here I am. Hi, my name is Jenny Moore. I am an EC6 Texas educator. I'm also a fine artist. I am business and financial literate, and then I also practice holistic living, and so that's kind of me in a nutshell, right? And so the topics that would be covered on a channel like this, if it's something that interests you, would be topics pertaining to education. Specifically, we'll get into this whole thing, but like specifically like homeschooling right now, right? Like let's just put a pin in that, and school stipends and all of that. So I'm very active in those conversations. And then art. Art to me is education. Education is art. And art and education are both sort of a political act, and so they're very loaded topics. And so I'm really looking forward to sort of diving into that before anybody starts to click off the button because they think, oh, she's not in my alignment. I'm fairly centrist, so you may see a really wide breadth of opinions come onto this platform, and also from me. I'm generally kind of just on the side of reason. So if you're looking to be, if you're a little worried I'm going to be polarized, or if you're like looking for polarization, I'm not really a polarized human. But I am a person who's very interested in having a really authentic conversation in a day and age in which humanities are pretty much under fire and education is under fire, right? So both of these wheelhouses I kind of function within. And then additionally, there may be topics pertaining to this way of holistic living, especially for homeschool families. These two things, they tend to go hand in hand. And then in addition to that, financial and business literacy. So if you're an artist, this is something that is super important to you. I know myself as an artist, I have struggled with promoting my work. I've struggled with how to manage the dollar end of it, right? Like how do you step away from your full-time job? How do you increase those margins? How do you make those moves? And so those are all things that, as I grow in my new journey, learning how to do all this, I'm hoping y'all will grow with me, because I just recently found myself at home, and I found myself at home for a couple of reasons. One of them being the state of education, right? So currently in Texas, we are undergoing some pretty big laws, and the laws have polarized, unfortunately, a lot of views about how education should be run going into the future. And we can make a whole podcast about why this may or may not happen, and its evils and its rights and everything else. But at its base level, what we're looking at is we're really looking at this shift in the way public schools are presented to the community, right? We used to be this, we were looking to make a community because the powers that be would pay for the school. If the test scores were high enough, then you get a little bit more kickback, right? But now we have and I'd have to go look up the exact specs, guys, so forgive me, feel free to fact check. But I was listening to another podcaster the other day, and they said that something like 40% of families, there was a 40% increase in families who are homeschooling as of this year. And that's insane. That's incredible. That's unprecedented. That's, since before public education sort of became the mainstay, and there's been a lot of families that wanted these vouchers because we know the public school system is broken. We know from being an educator, I know it's broken. We all know it's broken. But the alternative, right? We want a good education for our kids. They're entering into a market that's not only highly competitive, but they're entering into a world of AI. They're entering into a world where if you don't have executive skills, if you don't have these soft skills, right, and if you don't have the technical skills, that you're really going to struggle in a new world. And we don't know what that new world's going to look like yet. We don't know if the human component of having to drive these things is going to change, or if it's going to decrease or increase, right? So we want a good education for our children. And now schools really, really need us to attend, because if we don't attend, then they don't get money. Because schools are driven by test scores, but they're also driven by attendance. And schools will close, especially, we have a district here, and I'm not going to name districts, not mine, not, as I talk about my experience, but we do have a district here that is really struggling financially, as a lot of districts are right now, and they're closing schools. So you'll have an entire feeder pattern disrupted. If you don't know what a feeder pattern is, it's all the satellite elementary schools and middle schools that feed into the high school. Okay, so they kind of like condense as they go. So these neighborhood schools that exist throughout Dallas, which is where I'm at in Texas, they're disappearing. And now kids are going to have to commute farther to find their home school. And then it may change where their feeder pattern then ends up when they're older. So schools are starting to treat school like a business, right? When we need to drive traffic, we start appealing to our consumer. And unfortunately, a lot of businesses, instead of focusing on being authentic or building a community, which y'all folks, I'm really hoping that I don't do here. I'm really trying to come at this from an authentic place. Part of what kept me up podcasting for years is that although I'm auditory when I process, I don't want to be inauthentic. Right. Okay. So in business, unfortunately, we know what this looks like. It's marketing, right? We have billboards and we're going to have all these cool things we do with your kids. And we have small classroom sizes, which is usually a lie, right? Even in a district that, and the one I just came from actually had a pretty good working system of treating the child holistically. The district I came from before that was a little more test driven, but they were very well organized. So, districts have their goods and their bads, but when they present it as this, okay, we've got it, we've got the magic sauce, we're going to make your kid into like a Harvard graduate, it's all flashing lights. Okay. And that's a hard pill to swallow. Because again, we all want our kids to succeed and we all want our kids to be a Harvard graduate. Now, is that even really fair to our children? Probably not, right? Because not everybody even wants to go to Harvard. Not everybody wants to, not everybody's version of success is the same. Those are a lot of conversations in education now. Like, do you have to go to college to be successful? But they're presenting a dream. They're presenting an ideal. And unfortunately, when you're on the working side of these ideals, it's a lot of mandated curriculum. It's a lot of one size fits all. It's a lot of word salad that doesn't pan out to any results. And the talent, the teachers, who, by the way, most of us have PhDs and doctorates and masters in what we do. And none of us are paid like a doctor. None of us are paid like someone with a master's degree, well, maybe a professor. We're clinicians. We wear so many different hats. It's crazy. We're almost our own practitioner because we're contained within this room, especially when you're at the EC6 level, which is just it's a fancy word for the elementary level. You are encapsulated in your own space. So if you can imagine, if you ran a private practice as a massage therapist or something like that, like you do all the cleaning, you do all this, you wear all the hats. Well, teachers are the same, but we are not paid like a self-employed person. We don't get a profit like that. And we're not paid hazard pay for what, could or could not walk through our door. We're not paid liability pay for an accusation that could be leveraged against a teacher that may or may not. I mean, if it did happen, then so be it. But if it didn't happen, you're capsizing a career. You're not just firing a teacher. You're firing 5 years, minimum 5 years for a teacher to become masterful, 2 years of intense training and education. And for some of us, tens of thousands of dollars in education. I want to put that in there again. Tens of thousands just for our master's degree, the bare minimum in our bachelor's degree. Okay. I digress. So now the teachers are living through schools being run like a business. One of the hardest things I ever heard was, if you want to know why something's happening, follow the money. And when schools start being treated like a business as they are now, when I was still in the classroom 6 months ago, I saw it instantly. I was pregnant at the time, which we'll get to that in a minute, because that was a whole other situation. But I was pregnant at the time, and I loved my school. I need to stamp that. I loved my community. I loved my school. I switched from being a full-time RLA, so English literacy teacher, okay, and I worked in classrooms with kiddos who were incredibly diverse in their backgrounds. Our classroom spoke 6 languages, and so I loved ESL. And as a tutor, I'm actually a private coach and tutor, and I work with kiddos who, live with things like dyslexia. Okay, it's a podcast for another time. But as so I switched from that over to this new district. Okay. And I switched over to work in the arts instead. And so I went from having about 60 kids on my roster to about 600. I was serving 2 schools and I loved it. It was hard work. I was meeting the teachers, the parents. I was building relationships with 600 students, trying to learn all the competitions and building them foundationally for vertical growth. So that as I had them for, I was planning on being there for at least 5 years. An effective teacher, the most effective thing is for them to be there for 5 years. And for art, especially because the kids grow with you, right? So I have this great community built, and I come back in the fall, and we have a new AP, that's assistant principal, for y'all that don't speak teacher speak. And you could tell that the winds had changed. And I'd heard these laws coming in, and I sat through these meetings, and you try not to be doom and gloom, right? Because this is, things come and go in education, and you just sort of roll with them, and they don't always last. The administration will come down with some crazy new thing, and 2 weeks later they forgot because it wasn't sustainable to begin with. It was just the business end of education, which is the most evil part of public education. You'll hear me over and over again, right? Our children are not numbers. They're not a business. And competition can drive excellence, but in this case, it doesn't. Anyway, so I'm sitting there, and I'm trying to take it in, and I'm trying to roll with the new changes. And I go from having enough planning periods every day for 600 kids, you need a lot of planning, to nothing. And in addition, I'm pregnant. So the system wasn't sustainable. My baby came early. There was a lot of stress. There was a lot of this and that. And thankfully, respectfully, the district that shall not be named, they did let me go peacefully. I think mostly because once I had to bring HR into the situation, and my current AP realized that if you want to push me out of my job because the district is losing money, then you need to just have a conversation with me, right? We're all adults, but that's not how it went down. So all of the extracurriculars that parents love, right? Your kid's going to get all these new experiences, may not be there. And they may not be there very, very quickly. And I don't know for sure, right? Because I'm not psychic, but I can watch the trends. And unfortunately, I saw this trend happening 6 months ago and just got a text from my union saying that not only the district that I suspected was losing money, and that's why they were pushing people out of their jobs and cutting budgets. I mean, my budget got cut in half when I came in last year. But also that these new laws now in Texas are not protecting a teacher if somebody files a false report. So first of all, under these new laws, if you don't know, everybody knows about the library. I had to shut down my library in my room because I had to vet every single book, even though I personally strive to make sure that the books that are in my library would be agreeable to most parents. I don't believe it's my right as a teacher to pressure or push into certain subjects that really are not for me to address with the child. But because of the new law, I had to close down my library, which my kids were very sad about because they used to borrow books in my art room. But also under the new law, if a child is hurt, we're not allowed to render aid. I'm not allowed to reach out and help put a Band-Aid on a child's knee. And this seems a little hyperbolic, but this is really how it was presented to us in meetings at the beginning of this last fall. That if I render aid to this child, not only can I lose my job, but I can lose my certification. I could have legal charges pressed against me for helping a child who's hurt. And I get where some of these laws have come from, but I'm not talking about the right or wrong of this initiative, this is the reality of how this law is affecting education. This is the reality of what teachers are being told as they walk in the door. Close your libraries, don't render aid to children. And then in addition to that, these new laws, if a child does falsely report, which kids do, right? And don't get me wrong, everything that a kid should be taken into account. If you're a teacher with nothing to hide, you have nothing to hide, period. But kids get mad at teachers. Kids get mad at adults. They say things they shouldn't. And under the new laws, based on what I've seen so far, and again, please put it in the comments, fact check me, love it. Those are the kind of conversations I like to have. I'm not looking here to be right. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing, trying to start a conversation. Because this is what I'm interested in, right? It's one of the facets I'm very deeply engrossed into, especially since we may be shifting to homeschooling stuff. But again, we'll get into that later. So now, if a child says, hey, my teacher did XYZ because they're mad because I told them to sit down because they've thrown their pencil across the room for the 16th time, which as a teacher, you just have to put a boundary. I mean, it's not something that's permissible. I don't care if you're a soft parent. That's great. That's fine. But when you're in the classroom, and again, I'm not trying to rile any feathers about soft parenting, although teachers tend to have some opinions. But I'm not going to tolerate a kid throwing a pencil at another student just because you're a soft parent, because now that child's getting hurt. Now, if the child doesn't like that I've done this, and they go and they say something, as kids do, and kids should, right? It's our job to be discerning about what comes out of their mouth, because we should never tell a child they can't tell anybody. Now, CPS and the police and my license, they're all in jeopardy instantly with no support from my union. Well, I don't know about my union, but definitely not from my district. And that's terrifying because we don't receive hazard and liability pay. Texas is one of the highest paying states in the country for educators, but we still don't get hazard pay and we still don't get liability pay. So, I mean, yeah, you can keep telling me it's a noble profession all you want, but there's a reason why good teachers are leaving. Now, all of that aside, since this is mostly an introductory video to the things that I talk about, although I don't know how much art I'll really be talking about today, but I will at least give you guys a little taste of kind of what I do. So that's how I found myself at home. After fighting and fighting and fighting to stay there and fighting at the reality that maybe it was time to make a shift, I decided that with the birth of our daughter, and with her coming early, that now was the time for me to try to finally make my way independently into the world. I've been working on curriculum for a very, very long time. I've had a lot of homeschooling families that I coach. I do a lot of private coaching and tutoring for public school children in private school. So I get to see this whole breadth. And so it was time for me to start investigating multiple streams of income. Right, multiple streams of ways to pursue my creative and my education side. And then because business and finance runs in my family, I'm also taking on some of that as well, which is kind of a new thing for me. I mean, I've done it my whole life, but now I have to do it. Like I have to be a professional with finances, which is interesting. But again, it's just, sometimes in life you call on this accumulation of talents, right? This accumulation of interests you've had your whole life. And so that's how I found myself at home. So I hope y'all will join me on this journey as I kind of move through it. As I said, art-wise, there will be videos that encapsulate art for children homeschool. I'm really excited to make this one video that will kind of show families like how they can build these motor skills, because I see in public school all the time kids that just lack certain fundamental skills. So I really want to launch a series of videos that deal with the most fundamental basics of teaching art, either whether you're public school or homeschool or whatever, and they won't be expensive and they won't be complicated. And so you can use them as you will. But I'm excited to do those. I'm working on a line of literacy videos that will help break down some text. Working on, like I said, on my Teachers Pay Teachers, because I know that, there's a million of us making this content, but I know I was always happy it was there. And so I'm like, okay, this will kind of, get my toes in the water as far as making my own curriculum, which I've been working on, like I said, for quite some time. And then coaching, homeschool coaching, right? Like not only like where we're going in the politics of it, but the day-to-day, because homeschooling is a beautiful thing, but not if it's done to fidelity, not if it's not done in a way where you feel successful as a parent and your children are meeting the objectives that you have set for them, right? And we all know the topics out there about homeschooling. It has its goods and its bads, but so does public school. So at the end of the day, I mean, really, we're going to talk brass tacks. We have bad in both, but there are complexities there and things we'll talk about. And then art, as far as a private fine artist. So just a little bit on my background, I guess. I'm welcome to my podcast because I'm always all over the place. So I have my master's from Johns Hopkins in education. My undergraduate is in fine art, and then I have a lot of coursework in molecular biology and biology and sciences, which I'm just kind of a science data numbers nerd. On top of being very into art, very into talking about art, and then very into education and talking about education. So in art, I'm dominantly a painter. I'd say most people probably consider me a painter. As you can see from my background, like when I make things with kids, though, we also do a lot of sculpture. I prefer installation. I do clay works, but they're small clay works. So I do enjoy three-dimensional work, but most of what comes out of me is either photography, painting, or illustration. And so hybrid. I'm huge lover of hybrid. And then the AI, that's going to be a whole quagmire, because our whole household's even divided on in the world of AI. So I'm actually being trained in AI right now, and I said, whole other podcast on that one. So I guess so. We're at about 20 minutes. I feel like it's a pretty good long first video that's just all about me. I think the next one we're putting up, let me think. I think we're going to talk about, I'll put up the art one about the motor skills with the babies. It'll be a good one for me to maybe test my metal on a little bit. And so hopefully these won't all release at once, but this is the first. This is ground zero. This is patient zero, sort of, for, and hopefully it's okay. So anyway, as I said, thanks all for checking in. I hope I grow. I hope I get better. I hope the comments aren't too mean. But if they are, we'll have a conversation. Bye.